I thought that by now, everyone, including especially maybe Gene, would be sick of hearing about DSPs. I promise I'm not going to mention it at all. Actually, I think this is the main reason that Gene is leaving us, is because he's tired of talking about DSP. Anyway, I thought I'd take this opportunity, because obviously he's just going to be down the road, to start a good fight with Gene, which is always the funnest thing to do. So these slides are mostly put together in order to provoke Gene to fight with me for the next at least few years. So I decided, it's a little bit cryptic, the new fab. So can the electronics industry learn anything from the automotive industry? So I thought, we've spoken about a piece of technology and a piece of history, which is very important, but it's just a, relatively small piece of the history and technology that makes up systems that are around us. And I'm a systems person, so I like to talk about systems. Anyway, one of the big systems we drive around in is a motor car, and people have interesting perspectives when they compare our industry and the automotive industry. Which one do I click? That one. Yes. Okay. I'm not very good with slides. So, by the way, most people who've seen me speak before usually don't use slides at all. So, I'm a great follower of this guy, Edward Tufte. So, in emergency, go and have a look at his paper on PowerPoint presentations. Anyway, talking about our industry first, in certain circles you hear a little bit of, maybe a lot of doom and gloom about the integrated circuit industry. Is it maturing? Is it plateauing? Is it consolidating? Are we reaching the end of Moore's law? Should we prepare for huge workforce disruptions? So, topical for this room, our lives going to change. So, these questions, if you're one of the doom and gloomers, you might have asked, you've certainly heard people worry about these things in our industry. Certainly during these economic times, people talk about times of change. Let me first start by saying, well, what is the electronics industry or the integrated circuit industry? That for me is iconic. Randy would love this. Iconic, what is our industry? What is the industry we're working in? And my contention is that, and I shouldn't put a question mark there, this is an IT industry, an information technology industry, not an IC industry. What are the things we do with electronics so that we communicate? So it started with the telegraph, telephone, radio, TV, and I put in there, not a computer. For a long time, especially when certainly I was in college, people thought about the industry as a computation industry. And sure, computation goes on, but it's a bit like DSP. It's one of the pieces we need to do. But really, this is all about communications, providing information. I didn't edit it again. Now, last time, handy, that's a beautiful term for a cell phone. I think the Germans use the term handy for a cell phone. So it's all about information, seeing, hearing. I should have put touching, feeling, all the rest. Storing and finding, presenting, transporting, sharing, and consuming. So that's our industry. It's an information technology industry. What about the automobile industry? It's all about transport, okay? And actually, I put a date on here for a good reason. The Curved Dash was the first commercial motor car in 1901. And so the automobile, the internal combustion engine, 1901, so IC industry, internal combustion engine. And 1901 was the first commercialization. This is when people first made money from the public on motor cars. And it was IC now. In the future, maybe it'll be an electric vehicle again. By the way, at the turn of the century, that's the previous one, 19th to 20th, there were more electric vehicles than there were internal combustion engine vehicles on the road. So whenever we find ourselves thinking we've invented something, well, it's usually been done once before, and what we've done is really refined it and improved it. So dating these industries, I've already started this. I'd say the IT industry is roughly the same age, maybe older. Actually, I contend it's older. And that's because the first money was made in the middle of the 19th century on the information technology industry. The first transatlantic cable was laid in 1958. The first internal combustion auto was in 1860, but the first mass production, and therefore money was made in 1901. I think making money out of the IT industry, if you take it in electronic form only, forget about carrier pigeons, was much earlier than the automobile industry. So let's talk about manufacturing revolutions. When did the integrated circuit versus the IT, versus the automotive manufacturing revolutions occur? It took place in a similar time. And in fact, our manufacturing revolution probably occurred earlier as well. The first integrated circuit was in 1958, and you have to argue that that was the key to mass production of electronics and of, therefore, machines that were able to transport information efficiently. The first automotive production lines were, automated production lines were in 1950, but these were really just transfer machines. There weren't actually any assembly going on. And really, the real automation only came in the 80s when robots started to do actual assembly work of autos. So it's an older industry. So do we argue about maturity and stage of the industry on age? Probably not a good idea. By the way, just a little anecdote at the bottom. A lot of industries are similar too. The Model T Ford production lines ran from 1908 to 1927. In 1909, they were $950, and in 1923, they were $260. We wish. Back to the transatlantic cable. The colored slides, by the way, are just the fun ones. The first transatlantic cable, by the way, it was destroyed in a week by 2,000-volt pulses that they tried to pump down it to get the signal to the other side of the Atlantic. By the way, these things were privately funded. They weren't government efforts. So you can imagine that the investors weren't too pleased when someone blew that thing up in a week. Anyway, this is too long to read, but it's a little something that appeared in a 1958 Electric Trade Journal, and the rough translation of that is that the practitioners thought that the theorists were full of, BS, and didn't listen to them. Maxwell had predicted that this would happen. Those signals wouldn't get to the other side of the ocean, and the electrical guys who were doing the implementations and putting real wires across the land thought that it would. The first operational cable was not very much later, so these guys were brave back then. From a point of view of investment bravery, they make Wall Street look like babies. So that length of time later, they went and laid another cable. This thing was loaded onto the biggest ship ever produced at the time, called the Great Eastern. It was 233 miles long and weighed 5,000 tons, made of very primitive materials. By the way, the first transatlantic telephone cable was quite late, 1956. I referenced Paul Mahan's book on Oliver Heaviside, who was the person to first write down Maxwell's equations in their current form and show us how to get signals down a transmission line in a lossless way. Here's the Great Eastern, just for fun. So back to the comparison between the industries. Industry consolidation, is that an indicator? And I've stolen some thoughts from George Heilmeyer on industry consolidation. We look at the industry now and we see bigger companies are growing by accumulating other companies, and there's an accumulation. George gives real strong data, hard data that shows that the number of semiconductor companies has increased over time, actually. And in fact, in the same talk, so we're still getting more semiconductor companies every year. So certainly this is not an indicator that there's anything wrong or anything plateauing. He also actually makes a point, which I think is always interesting for TI folks, and that is that TI is the only company that's been in the top 10 semiconductor company for the entire duration of the industry. And I think that speaks to our flexibility and our ability to adapt to changing times, which is a topical thing at the moment. So now you might contend the number of auto companies is declined over time, and so maybe that's an indication that they're not like us, they're actually plateauing and maturing. But actually, if you look at the numbers, this was an anomaly and really a result of either depressions or wars. And so car production only declined for a short space of time. And actually, I would say that the number of auto companies is now increasing over time. And lots of people argue with me, Gene, give it a shot, with this one. But I can always name a couple of car companies that people have never heard of. And so I contend also that or the automobile industry is still diversifying, and there's still new companies every year. And this is my icon for the new companies. I don't know if anyone knows what this car is. It's an Ariel Atom. Ariel is a British company. It consists of 7 people. They export 300 cars to the US every year. They sell considerably more in the rest of the world. But there are probably half a dozen other small car companies that I could name. So, is there anything the electronics industry can learn from the automotive industry? Is it a predictor for us? I'm afraid not. No. So, but there are a few things I think that have happened to our industry that I believe at the moment we need to look at ourselves in order to figure out what our future is looking like. And there are a number of things that are happening that I think that we should take note of, and the title, A New Fab, should be a hint. I think that industries mature when their markets saturate. So we could look at the automotive industry and say maybe that market is predictable, that it might saturate as we run out of buyers and space and fuel and so on and so forth. I certainly don't think that's the case for our industry, and I'll make my argument as to why now. But why are we faltering in our progress? And I actually believe that we are right now. Our progress is not fast as it should be, not as fast as it should be. I think that we could be moving faster. And I think our main progress to bottleneck is design, and I should say deployment as well. Design and deployment of these devices. It's just too slow for us to keep up with the rate of demand of new applications. And I think my message here is that we need to automate more of the design of these things. And we need to stop worrying about what's inside and think more about what these things do. I think we need the design factory. So this is the point at which I usually say, I think at TI in 20 years' time, we'll have one design team. Just like we've got one fab right now, or one make organization. So we'll have one design team. And most of the business units will consist of business folks and applications folks. And what the device does is going to be much more important than how it does it. Now, that doesn't mean we won't need specialized teams of designers and production folks and RAM folks inside that team. But I think that we'll go into an era in which making these things that we call integrated circuits will become more of a production line process. Yeah, so my anecdote for this one, the red slide, I say that we're just doing the same thing over and over again. And a good example of this is given in Izzard Abidi, professor, I should say, with present company, Izzard Abidi from UCLA. He gives a great talk on the greatest designer, Alan Bloomlian. So many people in our industry haven't heard of Alan Bloomlian. I think up in Oregon on the Tektronix plant, there's a road named after Alan Bloomlian. He worked for EMI late in his career. But he invented all of these things that was in there. And some of them, the differential pair. I think almost the only important analog building block that he didn't have a patent on is the Gilbert cell. And his career spanned 17 years, from 1925 to 1942. He died at 38 years old in a plane crash. He was testing some radar during the war. And he wrote 2 journal papers and was granted 128 patents, one every 6 weeks. That's a challenge. Anyway, so my point here, and Izzard's point actually, is that what we've been doing for the last, coming on for 100 years, is just porting this stuff from one technology node to another and putting it together in different shapes and forms. And this is something that I think we should put a lot more energy into giving over to automation to do for us. And I believe that a lot more effort should be put into automation. The new growth phase, I think that we're sick of information. Okay, so apart from automating our jobs, I also think we need to give over more of our lives to automation. And I think that if you look at all the devices I put on the counter there before I stood up to speak, 3 of them, I think that's not socially acceptable. Socially acceptable to have 2 portable devices on you. Once you get the 3rd, you're a nerd. Anyway, so But we need to create consumers of information. We need to get ourselves out of the loop. And we're beginning to see this happen. So things like the Nest. We won't talk about Watson. And so we need to actually find other things to consume this information. And so we need to also let them design themselves. So beyond automation, of the circuits that we now produce and sell, there are things that we need to go beyond that. It's not very good right now. I had to give this picture of a robot. Robots, I think that's the answer. And robots in the very widest sense of the word. The Japanese are very advanced in creating robots that are involved in elderly care. The Nest is probably the most primitive robot that's around right now. But I think that robots in general are the next growth phase of the information technology industry. And these folks won't just be generators of information, but also consumers. We need to get to the point where 99.9% of the information that's produced in the world, we never see touch. Even Google can get it wrong. So since I think, and actually I've got a private view also about why we resist automation, not just in our jobs and building integrated circuits, but why we resist automation in our homes, in our motor cars. The equivalent of about, of a I forget this, whether it's 1 or 2 months, but does it matter? About 737's worth of people die on the roads every month or every 2 months. It's one of the two. And I think that we need to hand, or we will hand that task over to robots pretty soon. But I think that we have an abject fear of handing over control, and it's a very emotional thing, and that we're going to have to overcome that personal barrier to accepting more automation before this becomes a reality for us. If I could, I would click on this little thing. I'm going to click on it. So I'm going to play, just to end the talk, a little anecdote from Andrei Codrescu. He's a Romanian, so his accent, although we in this company are experts at understanding other accents, but just be prepared. And then I'll also click through a few of what I think, and write some of the, I think, are funnest phrases. So click, please.
Good news today from commentator Andrei Codrescu. While most Americans have been worrying these days about the economy or their kids' education, Andrei has been worrying about robots. Well, no more.
A friend I haven't seen in years asked me, how is it going? I lost my fear of robots, I told him. And when I read that the new Microsoft Xbox Kinect is trying to control the living room, I was shocked that I felt no outrage, no angst, nothing at all. And I realized that slowly, without feeling it, my living room, like my bedroom, and the rest of the house, and the city, and the country have been taken over by robots, working gently, swiftly, stealthily. In the bedroom, they've got you sleeping and loving on drugs. Machines wash your dishes, and someone playing on a screen somewhere decided what your house is worth and what clothes you should wear, shoes with springs in them, pants that lie about their true size, and a medical shirt that monitors your vitals and emails your doctor if anything is wrong. And someone put all the books out of the library on a Kindle and left you an extra room to rent when your pension will be gone, which will be soon. And your organs have already been distributed to the future people who need them because you signed the donor card either when they gave you or took away your driver's license. You can't remember for sure, but that's okay because you can always Google it. No, I'm not afraid of robots anymore, I told my friend. The only thing that worries me is that it looks like I have nothing to do, even though the media, entertainment, industrial, military complex is working around the clock to reassure me of the gravity of nothing. I'm trying to believe it, but I know that only the weather matters. Well, said my friend, I must be a lot younger than you, because I never even thought that I should be afraid of robots. I just thought that this is the way the world is. Oh, that's why I haven't seen you in years, I said.
So Thanks, everybody. Please lose your fear of robots. We need you to. Gene, thank you for the little piece in the robot.